drug traffic around here was just horrendous. I stayed 30 days out of a 6-month lease. I couldn't take it no more.
From the time that I grew up to where I could walk down the street walk home at 10 o'clock from downtown to where I could not even walk out my door. That's bad.
Traffic steady going all during the night, in and out. There wasn't a time you couldn't come down here and find somebody on the streets. This was the neighborhood to find anything and everything you wanted. The hood, dead leg, crack town, cross town, crack land, the bottom, dead end roads. Always something going down in crack town.
People robbing each other, young girls selling themselves, cursing, fighting in the street, people stabbing each other down here.
This neighborhood was ran out with prostitution, drug dealers, people shooting guns, cutting each other. Little kids roaming the streets while the mothers in the house smoking crack cocaine and stuff.
Police, they couldn't control it. You couldn't even walk down the street without having somebody approach you and asking you if you were straight. At first, when they come up to me, I didn't even know what they were talking about. I thought they were talking if I was gay. But then I found out they were trying to sell me crack cocaine. And it's just a bad crime area.
One guy had a knife sticking out of his leg, and now he couldn't walk because he's afraid to pull a knife out. He might bleed to death. We didn't watch TV. We had all the TV out here in the street we needed. Those were good old days.
Drug addicts running around here, crackheads, you know, they sell that hard stuff to people. They even sell it to kids. They really mess some of this town up.
I rebuilt an inner city neighborhood in DeLand, Florida. What was Cracktown is now the Garden District, but it would have never been a drug slum if there had not been a so-called war on drugs, which was actually a war on the poor. The huge effort to revive my neighborhood only served to push most of the drug dealers to other areas. Whack-a-mole efforts by law enforcement agencies, and efforts like mine, have been repeated all over the United States, where the drug war has spawned 1.4 million gang members and wreaked havoc in every country where U.S. drug policy has been applied. The failed experiment of prohibition nearly a century ago should have told us that all forms of drug interdiction here and abroad are doomed to failure. The simple fact that we cannot eliminate drugs inside of prison proves that any attempt to ban drugs for personal use by adults in the greater society are costly, cruel, and ineffective. Some of my own helpers spent time in prison for drug-related offenses. Some were able to rebuild their lives after prison, others were not. Either way, they aren't the only victims of a failed policy. All of society pays the price.
My name is David Brown, incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections for 7 years. 4.5 years at Tomoka Correctional Institution. The drugs that are there are rampant. They have large quantities of marijuana, heroin, ecstasy, pills, cocaine, powdered cocaine, crack cocaine. It's brought in by officers, it's brought in off of community work squads, it is brought in through visitation. Anything you want at Tomoka Correctional Institution drug-wise is available to you.
My name's Daniel Mack. I've spent 30 years of my 51 years of life in prison. I've been to several dozen different institutions. My story is a whole bunch of people's story in there, and it's really sad. It's really sad. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, come to Miami, Florida in 1969, and grew up in a lifestyle. My oldest brother was a cocaine cowboy. My other brother is doing his life in prison from various things, and it was a very, very trying time to grow up. Drugs is a major issue. I mean, they're available on the streets in massive quantities. They're available even in prison. Anything you want. If it's not the inmate smuggling in, it's officer smuggling in for money, because it's a big profit thing. Drugs was an easy way to make money and to be accepted in the crowd. And so I started getting more and more involved, and you know, it's a dangerous thing. So you know, some of the people I met, in order to be accepted by them, I become a violent person in a lot of ways, and started escalating my crime from simple burglaries into robberies. And I mean, even as I told Miss Arth, across the street, I robbed a store in 1986. I've never had a license. never had a vehicle, never owned an apartment. I have nothing, and it's all attributed to doing crime and letting drugs overtake my life. My father was an addicted personality. He was a drunk most of his life, and I've been through several alternate mothers behind it, and also I've become an addicted personality type, and my problems are because of that. He used to beat us because of drinking, because of his problems, fell off into the family. And first we come up and become those same kind of people, addicted personalities, prone to abuse. And sometimes the abuse at home was so bad, but my dad was so drunk that he wasn't really paying attention, and the alternate mothers would abuse us, and so I chose to run away. And it was really hurtful that nobody ever come looking for me. So for quite a while as a youngster, I still went to school, but I lived in a red truck up on blocks. You know, freezing at night, not being able to bathe and shower or eat decent meals. So, you know, a lot of this trauma has led me to the lifestyle I chose at an older age. And hence it's where you see me sitting now today, that, you know, I have nothing, am nothing, and nowhere. Okay, there's many ways to get drugs in. Most prevalent nowadays is through the guards. I mean, because, you know, with things being the economic situation what it is, you have millionaires and they have nothing to do but throw money away. So it's nothing to offer an officer $1,000 to get an ounce of pot in. And once he's enticed into that, he thinks, well, I got away with that easy enough. Then he start making it bigger and bigger. It's how they get cell phones in there and all these other things. But they also, inmates, go out to visiting park and they just put it in a little condom and they put it in their anus and they bring it in. I mean, it's the only safe way to do it, because to get caught with is introduction contraband. That's another 15 years consecutive added on to your sentence if you're caught doing it. And that's the end of it. Everything is about efficiency, which is understandable to an extent, but a little more compassion might be, you know, help us. And that's part of what's clogging the system up too. Entirely too many people with mental issues that should be hospitalized, and entirely too many people with drug problems should also be hospitalized or dealt with in a different alternate way. Sending to prison makes a person not only, who may not be bad, just has a drug problem, a very bad person. Because they go in there and they see the alternative lifestyle. Well, hell, if instead of just doing the drugs, if I start going to get a script of Oxycontins, I could sell them for $10, $15 a piece instead of, you know, $2 or $3 I pay for them. So they start learning about the financial situation. It's enticing when they see these guys living in $300,000, $400,000 houses that grew up as nobody on the street. And you see it today. You see all these younger black guys all driving out brand new cars with $2,000, $3,000 rims on it. And how do you think they got it? Through drugs. I did most of my life as I started out in 1977, Brevard Correctional Institution. I was bound over to adult court at the age of 17 I had did a burglary and I'd stole some guns and pound C4 plastic explosive from an ex-Vietnam vet. And so I took and sold this one connection in Outlaws, this pound of C4, along with the guns. They gave me 5 pounds of pot, an ounce PCP, an ounce cocaine. But I had no idea that they turned around and built a bomb. You can probably even read about this one. In West Hollywood, Florida, they tried to build a bomb to blow up the portico of the Hollywood Police Department. And so my first serious issue, I went straight to prison. And I went on another a trail of mayhem, chasing drugs and women, and this has been basically my whole life has been in and out of prison for stupid things. I mean, do you think I should mention the Methodist Church? You know about that?
No.
I did for 4.5 years for stealing $22.50. Now you talking about stuck on stupid, ignorant? For 2 hits of crack, I did 4.5 years of my life. And I could have easily died in there. easily caught some serious disease, or, you know, there's no getting around it. And these are the kind of stupid mistakes we make behind drugs and other actions, and that's basically part of the society's problem, that they're treating drugs and mental illness as serious crimes when they're really personality disorders and a sickness of the mind that can't be cured by locking somebody away. It's not going to cure it. Doesn't help us. I mean, you lock a man up for 50 cents. I mean, 10 cents, a $10 crack rock, and it's costing the taxpayers $100,000 a year better to support that. And so I don't understand. You know, there's got to be something different. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I wish that people might, maybe from listening to some things, maybe the right person will see it and be able to realize, you know, this is where you turn up. This is why you end up with a broke up body, 40 miles of bad country road looking face from being stuck on stupid. So, whatever I can say, if there's anything I can say to make people see that the system as we have it, it's not working as intended. How could you say, if you want this place to lock people up, well, lock them up and throw the trays in there like a dog kennel, but don't tell the community, the people, the public, that these are, instead of being institutions, as they make it sound like a college campus, they're not. They're prisons, and it's a very nasty, dirty, violent, scary place to be, and hopeless. It's a very hard thing to find hope every day when you wake up and they're knowing that the monotony of your life is going to be endless. Every day you're going to basically do the same thing. And an observation I have is, after doing so much time, that you start dreaming in monotony. You have the same basic dreams over and over again because there's no variation in your life. I can't be proud about much, but I did survive it. And I did come out with some righteous ideas. I mean, I was saved and born again in 2010, January 10th, in East Ham Prison. That's in Texas. That's another old story. But if you know about East Ham, Texas, in 1982, I think it was on Newsweek's front page, is the most dangerous prison in this country. More people died a week there than any other prison in this country. Stabbings, brains busted out, or even the guards. I mean, in Texas, they're the old school. You don't step out of line, or you hit a guard, and you can pretty much sign your own death warrant. They will beat you down, put you in a cell. If they decide to let you heal, you put in a cell, and they keep you incommunicado. And what can you do? You can't get a phone, can't write out letters. Or if they decide to kill you, guess what? You just disappear. Where'd he go? He transferred to another camp. Who's to know? It goes on. It really does. None of these camps do you ever stay long at, especially if you get in trouble, because, and my thing, I sold drugs to support my habit, but also the lifestyle, to smoke cigarettes, drink coffee, have a radio, and all the comforts other people have. Their mama or daddy sending them money. I had to hustle for mine as they get worse. And because I'm a white man, it's a hard thing to hustle, especially drugs, because everybody wants to try it. Well, I handle it by first person. I tell them, hey, you're going to take this nickel bag. You're going to pay me. One way they're going to pay me in blood. You're going to pay me my money. So, you know, I was pretty well known in there. You know, I made it pretty well. But now I'm suffering. I'm paying for it down the line. I'm all broke up. My body's physically, I'm 51, and I feel 91. I got severe arthritis. I can't hardly use my hands broke right now from fighting out here because of the drug problems. I mean, you know, change the system. Let them know that the only alternative is to start making changes in their policy towards drugs, towards mental illness, towards all the things that's choking the system, that's choking the life out of people that are the politicians that tell us they spend $80 billion fighting the war on drugs. The drug czars will tell you this. But the fact is that there's right now probably 10 times the volume of drugs coming in this country and being distributed daily. And every little town in this country, I mean, you ever heard of Lindale, Texas? It's a little country town, and you can get crack and everything else just as much, large quantities, good quality as any place else. So that tells you where the war on drugs is going, in everybody's pocket. There needs to be alternatives. The worst thing I ever saw in prison was a 19-year-old kid, real skinny, real pallid complexion white guy, had just come into Martin Correctional Institution, and they brought him in the cell, and you could see on his face he was terrified. Well, immediately one of the bigger guys in there decided to put his hand around his neck and said, "Come on, buddy, I'll take care of you. You'll be all right." I brought him up to the room, and they proceeded to rape him, and probably 10 or 15 of them hit this poor kid before. And when I say hit, they had sexual relations with him in his anus, or forced him to give him fellatio before the police realized something was wrong, and they actually took him out of there and didn't do anything to the inmates because they do what they do. But this kid, I don't know if he survived. I don't know if he killed himself behind it or what, but it was pretty bad. Another one wanted to watch a Texas Walker Ranger.
Yeah.
And then the other guy wanted to watch some beauty contest, whatever. But the guy wanted to watch Texas Walker Ranger was in there first, so he had first choice. Well, the guy didn't like it. They didn't say a word. He got up from the seat, walked out, come back one night, and this is the day before I went home. This is '96. And I'm sitting right behind, probably see the guy coming there, walked up behind the guy, grabbed him in the choker behind the throat, and started stabbing him. And stabbed him 73 times, they say. I mean, he's already dead long before that, but this guy just flipped the wig, and stuff like that happens. I'll tell you that I'm here by the grace of God. I should have been dead many, many times. I've been stabbed, I've been cut, had my brains busted out. I have 6 bones in my zygotic arch, or face. The occipital lobe of the eye are crushed from being hit with a pipe. My jaw's been fractured several times. Matter of fact, I have to eat on one side because I can't. The other side doesn't open far enough. My nose obviously been broke several dozen times. I mean, I was once pretty, believe it or not. And now I'm looking like this. 40 miles of bad country road. Kind of the truth. But it is what it is.
There you go. Thank you. I bought up this place called Cracktown in DeLand, Florida, and redid it, and that's how it looks now.
So the crackheads have a really nice place now. So I have a lot of money and I want to use crack. Is that okay?
Absolutely. In fact, it should be legalized.
That's right. Very good. Good answer.
Regulated and
tax
legalized.
it and that's it.
Tax and that's it. There's no end of problem. That's where most of the corruption comes from, both the governmental corruption and organized crime.
That's right.
Alcohol and tobacco both are far more dangerous than any of the illegal substances.
I mean, if you want to do heroin, as long as you're not breaking into my house, stealing my TV.
Well, you won't be if it's legalized.
Yeah.
If it's illegal, you're going to be doing all kinds of nasty stuff.
Is that close?
Many, many troubles.
Okay. Is gambling one of the solutions?
Yeah, I think gambling should be legalized because that's the way you control it. Same thing with drugs. When it's illegal, then organized crime controls it. Same thing with prostitution, too. Anything that's consensual, you have to have a proactive law enforcement. That is, they go out looking for trouble. They go out looking for people to arrest. And that's when it starts to impinge upon our civil rights, because they have to stop you to search for drugs, for example. They have to look into your bedroom. They have to see if you guys are playing poker in your living room, things like that. And it's better to have it out in the open, control it, tax it, and put that money into our coffers and take it away from the organized criminals.
Earlier you indicated, I think you said, or you inferred, or it sounded like, you thought that the war on drugs was a failure.
Complete and utter failure. When I was a teenager, it was one of the few, my dad, who was to the right of Attila the Hun, as he put it, was a big backer of William F. Buckley. And I remember Buckley and the very conservative Republicans at the time, even all the way back to the 70s, were against the war on drugs. And National Review magazine in the 80s had a cover, and it said, "Drugs are bad, drugs are bad, drugs are bad, but the drug war is worse." And the conclusion of the article was we had to end the drug war. It's caused nothing but trouble. It's been going on for 40 years now. Nixon got elected on the law and order agenda back in 1971. Ehrlichman admitted in an interview that they used the war on drugs and as an issue to get elected, and it worked. In a 1994 interview with writer Dan Baum, Watergate co-conspirator and Nixon's counsel and assistant, John Ehrlichman, admitted, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." I know it sounds completely diabolical, but that's an exact quote. And effectively, we've had that same policy ever since. You won't hear any politician in the country, in fact, saying that we should end drug prohibition. But if you go back to alcohol prohibition, it ended in 1933, which is a very interesting year because that was the depths of the Great Depression. And really it was the Great Depression which caused politicians to think, well, we just can't afford this anymore. For example, we've got this crazy war on drugs. They saw fit during Prohibition to actually have an amendment, the 18th Amendment. And then when they decided it didn't work, they had a 21st Amendment. And now we have this extra constitutional policy which enforces this war on drugs, which is destroying our country. And it's driven up our incarceration rates to the highest levels ever. It was started as a racist and cynical campaign ploy, and not one single candidate, a major candidate, will say one word against it. It's completely nuts. And I could list 100 policies like that are completely crazy. And the politicians won't touch them with a 10-foot pole because it's political suicide. And that's the problem with this country.
We can talk for a long time, Michael. I enjoyed it.
The only reason I'm running in this campaign is because there are issues that are not talked about. In fact, they're assiduously voided by the politicians.
Because it's not comfortable.
They won't talk about the war on drugs, for example. We've got our incarceration rate here in Florida is 800% higher than Canada's, and yet our rate of violence is still higher. So obviously throwing people in jail doesn't work.
Human behavior, you cannot control it. It's going to be legislated.
Yeah.
I mean, you are a brave man because that is not a popular position.
Yeah, there are 800,000 gang members in this country. 30,000 gang members in this state. They all sell drugs.
So why don't we have, how many liquor stores do we have?
Yeah.
Why don't we
legalize it, regulate it, tax it?
You cannot legislate human behavior. So if they're gonna want to do drugs, let's get some money off.
That's right.
It's not a sin tax. Actually, yes, it is.
Yeah. You'll have less of a problem, and you'll save tens of billions of dollars.
Right?
What I mean is taxing and regulating the drugs which are now controlled by organized crime, syndicates, and international cartels. We have a situation, it's pure hypocrisy right now. The legal drugs kill 450,000 people a year. Marijuana, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, peyote, ibogaine, ayahuasca. There has never in history been a single documented overdose case in any of those drugs. The truly dangerous drugs that are illegal would be heroin and cocaine. And all illegal drugs combined, the tally, the annual death rate is 17,000. However, there are tens of thousands of deaths related to the illegality on top of that. The gang activities in all the cities, drug war like the one that's going on in Mexico right now. The Mexican cartels are operating in over 200 American cities now. We cannot control drugs inside of prison and never have been able to. So the idea that somehow, after we've been doing this drug war now for 40 years, now they keep just reshuffling the plan somehow and they think it's going to work. Well, it hasn't worked in 40 years. and building more prisons is not working, we now have, in Florida, Florida has the fastest growing prison population in the United States. And the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, 700% higher than Canada, 24 times higher than India. The United States, with a population of, we have 4.5% of the world's population, and we have 23% of its prisoners. Despite jailing everybody, we still have the highest rate of violent crime among all the industrialized countries. So it's a clear and proven failure. The drug war is a failure, and a majority of Americans agree. But most Americans do not yet agree that we should do the logical thing, next step, which is tax and regulate these drugs just like we do alcohol and tobacco. Back in the Prohibition era, beginning with the Harrison Act in 1919, we made alcohol illegal. And what happened? You all know what happened, right? The gangsters took over, had speakeasies. There was this general contempt for the law. And it was the flapper era. And everybody broke the law. And that resulted in a much higher rate of violence. The prisons filled up. It cost an incredible amount of money to deal with it. It cost so much that by 1933, what happened during the height of the Depression, our legislators, and probably most of you don't know this, does anybody know why we ended Prohibition? The main reason? The main reason was because it cost too much. We could no longer afford it. Not to mention all the people dying from bad liquor and the gangs and the gangster activity and all the murders and all that stuff. So then in 1971, Nixon was running his campaign, and he thought, God, everybody hates the hippies. So I'm going to run my campaign against hippies and drugs. And it was a brilliant strategy. The guy was a weasel, but it was a brilliant strategy, and he won. And politicians ever since, law and order politicians, have been saying, lock them up, throw away the key, minimum sentencing laws. Okay, and then the second part of that is beginning in 1955, we thought, a lot of people read stories about people being locked up in mental institutions. So this process of deinstitutionalization began also. And then it sped up during the Reagan administration. You all saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that was indicative of some of the institutions. In fact, the very institution that inspired that story was an insane asylum at that time. It's now a prison. Our prisons have become insane asylums. That's what we do with our mentally ill. And so there's three parts to this explosive growth of the prison system. One, the institutionalization that began in the 50s, the drug war, which began in the late 60s, and then began the minimum sentencing laws. I'm a real law and order candidate. I want to see the respect for the law return. We actually have gangsters. They call themselves gangstas, gangster rap. It has inspired this hate and contempt for the law that's global now. We spawned a whole culture of people, and they wear low pants. Why? Because in prison you can't have a belt. So this whole style of pants hanging down is from prison culture. And so it's a racist policy. It's a war on the poor. That's why I'm against prohibition, and that's why law enforcement against prohibition is a group called LEAP, 11,000 members strong, 51 speakers, ex-cops, judges, and so on, are traveling around the world talking about this horrendous thing. No politician will bring it up, but I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about it till it becomes normal, and we do the right thing.
One of the things you have to understand about politicians is that they don't make waves. They're like surfers. They ride the waves, but they don't make them. And our job is to help them catch the wave. When I was the chief of police in Fernandina Beach, we were very tactically successful. In fact, at one point, we cleaned every drug dealer off of the street, and things were wonderful for about 6 weeks, when the real drug dealers moved in to take their place. And then we had machine guns and kidnappings, and I remember walking into my office saying, gee, I wish I had my old drug dealers back. They were much kinder and gentler. I had very few opportunities to make cases against people for driving under the influence of cannabis. The reason is they didn't draw attention to themselves. The way you would catch them usually was late at night, and they would be driving 10 miles an hour below the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2, focused straight ahead, stopping 20 feet in front of a stop sign. On the other hand, when we arrested a young person with a 6-pack of beer, we usually stopped him for doing 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, driving aggressively, running stop signs, and things of that nature. There's an old legend that when Prohibition ended in December 1935, that Al Capone was meeting with some of his lieutenants on the courthouse steps in Chicago, and one of his lieutenants ran up to him and said, "The last state just ratified the 21st Amendment, and Prohibition is over." Al Capone is reputed to have said, "Well, boys, we're out of business." And that's the kind of logic that they used for that decision. But when you create bad policy, in order to justify that bad policy, you do all sorts of absurd things just like that. Let's look at what the stated objectives of the war on drugs are. And I've heard these through seminar after seminar. If you get a DEA agent in here, he will tell you these. Number one is you want to stop the death and disease caused by the use of certain drugs. Now, you can use cigarettes, which kill more people than all the rest of the drugs put together, but you can't use marijuana, which has never killed anybody. In fact, the only way you can overdose on marijuana is if somebody drops a bale on you. Stop the destruction of families caused by illegal drugs. We're going to see how it is that it helps the family when you put the husband in jail for smoking marijuana. Stop the loss of productivity caused by illegal drugs. One of the interesting things about drugs is that they used to encourage minorities to use drugs to increase their productivity. Opium was used with the Chinese, or the Chinese were allowed to use it in order to soothe them from the terrible days that they had had in the railroad jobs and other hard jobs they had. And the freed blacks were actually given cocaine to increase their work as stevedores on the docks. So it's kind of weak to come in and say that it's loss of productivity. It can be, but it can also enhance productivity according to a lot of people. Stop the damage to developing children and young adults caused by illegal drugs. Well, I think that I would rather have stuff of a known purity and a known quantity from a licensed manufacturer than to create a situation where the criminals deliberately go to the schoolyard and recruit the students to sell their product inside the school. At least the guy that gets busted for selling beer to underage people down is not down inside the school selling his product. Marijuana. This is where a huge portion of the enforcement goes. In fact, a couple years after George Bush, or before George Bush was out of office, he wanted to prioritize marijuana enforcement instead of deprioritize. We got some other things going on the crime and terrorism front that would make you think you would want to use your resources in a different way. And I can tell you the reason that they have fought medical marijuana as long as they have is because when you have people that have cancer, MS, all kinds of other painful things that are taking marijuana for relief in therapeutic dosages, and they're not committing axe murders, and they do know how to spell their name, then you stop and think about why are we putting 750,000 people in jail for this same thing when we could be collecting taxes off of it. If you get that first olive out of the bottle, the rest of them come a lot easier. My answer to that is that if you're old enough to die for your country, you're old enough to enjoy anything that any other citizen can enjoy under the law. That's the thing. They moved the draft to 21 because you haven't reached age of competence. Then I'd say move all of those drinking ages and everything else. But if you're old enough to go off and die, you're old enough to make your own decisions about your own body.
Do you think the DARE program has actually helped?
No. One thing about education is you have to tell the truth. And if I go in and tell little Johnny that if he uses marijuana that he's going to forget how to spell his name and he's going to grow an extra thumb, and he sees little Charlie who uses marijuana every weekend and he's on the dean's list and he has no extra thumbs, your credibility suffers. And so then when you tell little Johnny about methamphetamine, he doesn't believe you then either. Don't ever get beguiled into thinking that decriminalization is the answer. It helps you if you get caught with something that doesn't ruin your life. You get a civil penalty or something like that. You don't go to jail, you don't serve time. But it still leaves the distribution in the hands of the criminals. And what is causing the violence is that the criminals can't enforce their contracts and protect their areas legally, so they have to have an enforcement arm, and it's called a gang. And so you leave all that in place and you force the quasi-law-abiding citizen to deal with criminals in order to get the product. So that's not a good solution. Shame on me, but it was in the last couple of years of my career that I even started reading anything that the government hadn't given me. So I operated in a pretty much a vacuum, but after I would literally bring a bus in and clean the whole neighborhood out. Everybody that ever sold anything to anybody, we'd load them up at one time and take them out of there. And the place was wonderful. You could walk down the street 2 o'clock in the morning for about 6 weeks. And then we had the Miami boys come in from Jacksonville, and they announced their arrival by firing a machine gun out the window all the way down 9th Street. They kidnapped 2 or 3 people, were threatening to kill people. And then after doing that several times, and things got worse instead of better, even I could sit down and say, wait a minute, something's not working here. And so when I really started to research it, do you know what the practical effect in a real market is of me arresting a drug dealer? Now, I arrest him because you want to get fewer drug dealers. Would that be rational? I arrest a drug dealer, take him away, he's selling cocaine or marijuana or something on the corner. He's not flying it in an airplane. He's going to get 2 to 5 years. And he goes away. And we know that people don't make decisions on drugs based on the law. It's a personal decision. I guarantee you anybody in this room that decides they want to smoke marijuana will not choose not to smoke it because it's against the law. They might choose not to smoke it because it's not good for you, in your opinion. They might choose to do it for a host of reasons. But that's not why. I mean, I go to the Rotary Clubs. I said, if I put pharmaceutically pure heroin on this table, give you a nurse practitioner to inject it, we'll dose you exactly properly, no risk of dying, give it to you for as long as you want it for free. How many want to come up and get started? No hands. Say, well, if the absence of the law and the ability to get it even free doesn't affect your decision not to use it, and the existence of the law and it being hard to get doesn't affect the decision of the guy I put in jail last night, then what is the purpose of the law? Well, the effect that the law is having is simply to create an environment where the black market can thrive. That's what happens. I put this guy in jail. He comes out, like I said, what's he going to do? He's going to do the only thing he knew how to do when I put him in, and he's learned how to do it better while he was in there. And he comes out and he goes back to do what he was doing before I stopped him. There's a problem. Because the market always works. When you create a temporary shortage of something where the demand is relatively static, you raise the price. You have a local price spike. When you raise the price and have a price spike, what does that do? It invites in more entrepreneurs. Now, somebody that wouldn't take the risk before will take the risk now. More likely, some lower dealer from somewhere will move in, take his place, and some amateur will take that guy's place. But the net effect is, when he gets out of prison, goes back to his corner, there's already a guy there. So I didn't get rid of a drug dealer. I got 2 drug dealers instead of 1. And every time we put somebody in jail, that's what happens. So it is a self-defeating activity. And like I said, now you got the 2, and they don't like the competition, and they got no way to deal with it in the courts, and there we are. There are many things that I could have done more productively than I did. And it is tough when you get to the end of your career and the thing that you were recognized nationally for, being successful, proves to have been counterproductive and extremely unsuccessful, and you got no time to correct it. So that's the same thing that a lot of law enforcement, Jack Cole, the executive director of LEAP, same thing, the lives that he screwed up. Norm Stamper, same way. In fact, he's written an interesting book called Breaking Ranks about a lot of police issues, but the drug war is one of them. Yeah, I absolutely regret it.
The Fifth Amendment states, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Nevertheless, if any law enforcement agency in Florida has probable cause, any kind of property believed to be associated with any criminal activity may be seized. If you had a party and someone left a roach on your porch, the feds could seize your house. It is incumbent upon the property owner to prove that no crime was committed, and the government still does not have to return the property. Even more outrageous than this assault on the Bill of Rights is the fact that in 1985, Congress authorized equitable sharing, whereby the seized assets may be used by the law enforcement agencies for their own purposes. At best, this practice invites corruption. At worst, it amounts to a license to steal. In Milwaukee, the city seized a 36-unit apartment building plagued by dope dealers. Even after the owner evicted the tenants he suspected of dealing, hired 2 security firms, and gave the master key to the police. In May 1988, U.S. Customs agents in San Diego seized the Atlantis II, an $80 million research vehicle owned by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, which was once used to explore the wreck of the Titanic. The agents found a tiny amount of pot in the shaving kit of a crew member. A spokesman for the Customs Service in Los Angeles was quoted by Time magazine as saying that if a single marijuana joint was discovered of Queen Elizabeth II, that they have the authority to seize it. The war on drugs, by being proactive instead of reactive, inevitably becomes an assault on civil rights. Ending drug prohibition across the country will lower violent and property crime, gang activity, and organized crime. We will then have the resources to deal with the health issues connected with mental illness and substance abuse. The tentacles of these special interests wanting to continue the failed war on drugs run very deep in our economy. There is the immensely profitable prison building industry. Drug and alcohol companies benefit from laws prohibiting low-cost, grow-your-own alternatives. Law enforcement agencies get bloated budgets and asset forfeiture proceeds. The military gets more funding. These are only a few of the legally sanctioned special interests. Others wanting to see the drug war go on indefinitely include terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, who finance part of their operations from the opium trade. Global organized crime syndicates, drug cartels, drug gangs, and the local pushers selling drugs to kids. You see here back in the 20s, they wanted to stamp out prohibition because the illegal alcohol and the gangsters were affecting the children. The criminal doesn't care who he sells to, whether it's an adult or a kid. If it's regulated, then there's no point in selling to kids because you'll get in trouble for that. An effective policy approach is clear, but our leaders have neither the insight nor the will to change course. Some of you may have met former DEA agent and police chief Jerry Cameron, who spoke in this room in April. Like a lot of ex-drug warriors in LEAP, that's law enforcement against prohibition, he said that we must end the expensive and self-destructive war on drugs and treat drug abuse as the health issue that it is. We must also develop sound practices to house and treat the mentally ill. Mandatory sentencing requirements do not work, and this policy must be repealed. I started an organization called Villages for the Homeless that is in the process of developing a model for treating and providing both permanent and temporary housing for those with mental illness and substance abuse issues. This will cost far less than prison and help solve a myriad of social and economic problems related to law enforcement, urbanism, and public health.
So welcome to the studio, Michael. It's a pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you.
You know, I've been following some of the things you've done over the years, and I guess just straight off the top of my head, you're not necessarily a conventional candidate. Would that be fair?
Oh, that's very fair.
Maybe an understatement,
yeah,
right?
definitely from outside politics.
Well, and that's one of the things that I actually like. I like citizen politicians, people who have met a payroll, for example, people who have had to navigate through the process of government instead of just being on the inside the whole time.
Sure.
Once you've done that once or twice, all of a sudden it changes the way you look at government, doesn't it?
It does, and it wasn't just this project in DeLand that got me interested in running. It was spent about 15 years as a policy analyst working on a pair of books called The Labors of Hercules, Modern Solutions to 12 Herculean Problems.
I saw that. That's on one of your websites.
Yeah, and so in the course of doing that, I just got madder and madder the more I understood about how our political system works and how most of the important issues are being ignored. Finally, I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I realized I've got to do my duty and get out there and try to do what I can to change the system. And we're talking about systemic institutional change here.
So, Michael, I always ask this, especially of politicians that are not necessarily career politicians. What was the turning point? I mean, you said you got madder and madder, but was there a moment when you knew you had to run?
I spent about 8 years redoing this neighborhood, which previously was called Cracktown. Now it's called the Garden District. And so in the course of doing that,
And that's in DeLand, Florida, by the way.
Yeah. I bought up 32 crack houses and kicked out the drug dealers and rebuilt that neighborhood. And so one of the things I thought a lot about was the war on drugs. And I ran my own personal war on drugs in that neighborhood and was able to push the drug dealers out. But the problem is they're like fire ants. You can exterminate them in one area, but they're just going to pop up somewhere else.
Right.
And until we address this problem of having a war on drugs at all, we're not going to solve that problem.
You know, that story creates a thought in my mind. That is kind of indicative of a lot of the journeys that I hear of from people as they start to wade in to politics. And it's usually because of some kind of personal involvement, that they've got a project going on, a different job or something, where all of a sudden they start dealing with something. And it's almost like the farther you wade into it, the deeper it gets, doesn't it? Like you mentioned, the fire ant analogy is a good analogy.
Well, what happens is once you dig into one issue, you eventually discover all the interconnections to everything else. And we have an incarceration rate in Florida. It's the fastest growing in the country, and it's 8 times higher than Canada's rate. And yet we still have a higher rate of violence.
Right.
So you start to wonder, 8 times higher, that's absolutely astonishing. That's horrible. And when was the last time you heard a politician even bring it up? And then you look into the reasons why it's 8 times higher. Well, we had the deinstitutionalism of mentally ill that began in the 50s, accelerated in the 70s, and that's put 500,000 mentally ill people in prison. So prisons have become the new asylums.
Mm-hmm.
Then it put 500,000 of the mentally ill on the streets. Well, that became our plague of homelessness. And then in 1969, Nixon, as a cynical and racist campaign ploy, declared the war on drugs. And as a consequence, we've had this 40-year war on drugs, which hasn't served any useful purpose whatsoever. In fact, it's really become a war on the poor. And then the third part of that is the minimum sentencing laws, which got enacted as a reaction to the other two, got enacted in the 80s. And so we took power away from the judges to make individual decisions about what would be best for these criminals or people being arrested. Now we just indiscriminately throw people in jail without any thought to what would be the right way to rehabilitate them.
So sometimes, like minimum sentencing guidelines, you can almost run into a law of unintended consequences. You try to fix one problem and you start to create another.
Well, it's been the piecemeal approach, the Band-Aid approach. I've been tackling the homeless issue for the last 3 years, and I've been trying to build a village for the homeless over in Volusia County. We have the land, it's already zoned for this particular purpose, and I've offered my services as an urban designer, and we have a civil engineering firm that's willing to donate their services, and we have a woman who's willing to donate her entire estate to help fund it. So we have all the elements in place to consolidate 24 agencies that now deal with the homeless. The problem is, as H.L. Mencken once said, never argue with a man whose job depends on not being convinced.
That's wise.
Yeah, so you get all these agencies, and all these people get jobs, and they have grants, government funding, local grants, donations, and they've built their world around this money coming in. And yet we haven't solved the problem, homelessness. A lot of the problem is because of this scattershot, piecemeal approach. We haven't dealt with the problem in a systemic fashion. We haven't dealt with the fact that the mentally ill aren't getting the treatment they need, and they're living under the bridges and so forth. So what I proposed is a village for the homeless, be a pedestrian-oriented village out by an existing drug rehab center off of Red John Road near the existing county jail. It's in nobody's backyard, so which is one of the problems with homeless shelters.
He's trying to eliminate the NIMBY issue, the not in my backyard part.
And it's a legitimate issue. That's the thing people forget. Do you want a homeless shelter in your backyard? Do you want people who are using drugs and in dire need of rehabilitation wandering around your yard and your children? No, nobody does. Also, it's bad for them too, because the shelters inevitably end up in a bad neighborhood, which just sentences that neighborhood to eternal slumdom.
Right.
And so by putting it...
And creates different kinds of temptation.
Yes, yeah. So it's not good for them, and it's not good for... this. We're talking about the adult homeless now. We're not talking about kids and families. They need to be reintegrated back into the community as fast as possible. So this would be for those needing supervised drug rehabilitation, and for the mentally ill who just don't function very well in society. And it would provide work opportunities and so forth. Dean, known among those in the homeless community as Dino the Dinosaur, would periodically stumble out of the woods to forage in the city and paw through dumpsters like a feral animal. This is Dino in 2006, passed out by the side of the road near my house. After I called 911, Dino got the usual triple response. which means the police, the fire department, and an ambulance all show up just in case. If you multiply this response by the inefficient way in which we have been handling homeless-related issues all over the country for decades, it's comparable in cost to the Normandy invasion and just as lethal. Do you remember passing out in the Garden District?
That might be a possibility.
How many times a year do you think that might happen?
Too often. Too often. It's a shame, but my name is Dino.
Why do they call you Dirty Dave?
Well, because I did the dirty deeds done dirt cheap kind of thing.
Like what kind of deeds? Yeah.
If the money was right, it didn't really matter.
Allison Megan Warren. I'm a nurse, LPN.
All right.
Used to be Miss Daytona Beach, 1981. I was Miss WMFJ, first runner-up, and I'm a hottie. For real. You look it up. WMFJ, it's a radio station. And I get tan and I look hot. So if you know a guy that wants me, please.
Don't sneak up on me, dude. I'll have skill.
Please have him on me.
The old cliche, I'm a jack of all trades, a master of none. Well, I'm a master of painting. And did some jail and prison time and a little bit of 6 years in the military. I have a drinking problem. That is my gig. I screwed up. Here I am. I copped to it. There you have it. But I do everything. I'm really good. I work as much as I can. I get by. I recycle all my beer cans, hence the recycle bucket over there. I do what I can. I go green when I can. I help other people out. I feed everybody. I am the camp chef. I rule the roost. I am that guy. Dirty Dave. And I got pinched on a couple of baby stuff, you know. Did about 13 years old. Yeah, they're
What's the story of drugs in prison?
Easy money. It's easy. If you have somebody on the outside sending you money to your account and you got dough that you can get your hands on, you know, all bets are off. You can get anything you want. Everything that's on the menu. You know the deal, and whoever I'm talking to knows the deal. From soup to nuts. I do not dig none of that except for marijuana, and keep alcohol on the list. Please to God, don't cancel that out on me, because then I'm going back. Because I'll start breaking in every I'll make a still. I don't care. I'm gonna drink. You know, if we would come up with something like a camp or you know, or an area where we can all get together and have health care and food and rehabilitation and employment and stuff, I think that's a wonderful gig. I think that's probably one of the best thoughts I've ever heard. I think that would be wonderful for everybody. I mean, you can call it commune, you can call it, but you know, work for your efforts. And maybe that it'll work out in the long run for everybody. And the next thing you know, it gets thinning out. Everybody goes the good way, and then you bring some more bad ones in, and you get them out good. Bring out, you know what I mean? Just like washing dishes. Bring in the bad, put out the good. Now, there should be a facility, because there's a lot of mentally ill homeless people out there that they have
potential. They do. They can be productive. But what it is there's nothing for them out there. There's a lot of mentally ill people out there that need help, that don't need to be laying in the woods. They need to be with a psychologist or psychiatrist on meds that aren't getting it because they can't get it or afford it. I think the best thing is, yeah!
No.
I got somebody coming in right now. Everybody calls into my camp so I don't clobber them with a baseball bat or something. This guy's name is Billy. Where'd you get a load of this cat?
Hey, Bill.
Something going on there, Hot Rod. Go see that skillet over by them pots over there. Grab you a chicken wing. Get your chicken wing. I want to make a sandwich. Just get the fucking chicken wing, man. Quit crying. I can't afford to own bread on you. Bring him. 20 years ago, that's what it looked like. That's a joint in his mouth and these tattoos. I miss him bad, man, because I worry about him.
It's a hard life, but it's a comfortable life if you got the right friends around you.
It's a horrible life, and I'm done with it.
And I'm tired.
I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I try and I try and I try, man. You know, it cut me a break. I'm through with this. I'm about ready to move on, maybe go south. I don't know. But it's tough. You can go ahead and sugarcoat it all you want, pal, but it ain't.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat because I know where you come from.
It sucks. Every day it sucks. I want more for myself. I want to better myself. I fake it like I'm having fun. Yeah, not so much. I feel like hammered shit. Sucks.
He's always took care of me. Made sure I was fed, clothed, warm. It's hard.
Nobody rolls it.
It's a hard life.
Goes hungry, cold, or thirsty.
Feed everybody we can.
End up not sleeping or eating myself. Make sure everybody else does it, though.
He's always made sure that I've always had anything I need, right, Dave?
That's what I do. And I'll end up going to bed hungry, but everybody else is warm, thirsty.
And he's always told me, though, I don't have to worry about leaving wide open. He's got my back.
Damn right.
I can sleep and snore. I know that if something happens, he's going to get up first. Take care of business, because we're in the woods, man. It's hard life. It is hard-ass life. I ain't Daniel Boone.
Yeah, I think this guy's on the right track because he may be crazy, but he ain't stupid. Look at that. Let's do this. Okay? Let's do this, man. Come on with it. And let's give him a heads up or a leg up, which way you want to call it.
I can give him a leg.
It drives me nuts. Oh, goodness. It drives me nuts. Look.
How'd you lose it?
Drunk drive when I was 23. I'm 50. I'm going on 56 October, so I'm 55. But.
The so-called war on drugs, and the phrase so-called is important, is a cover for other things. Domestically, the war on drugs amounts to a technique for ridding the society of people regarded as useless. So it's a highly selective war and a highly punitive one, designed to deal with what have sometimes been called the dangerous classes. The history of prohibition, that's what it's been throughout most of its history back to the 19th century. Internationally, the war on drugs is just a cover for counterinsurgency. So take Colombia, the center of the war on drugs. Billions of dollars poured into preventing cocaine production hasn't affected production. The price on the streets remains about the same, but it has been a mode of militarizing society, backing huge atrocities, clearing out areas so that multinational corporations can come in and set up industrial development, agribusiness, removing the campesinos, and so on. It's called a war on drugs, but the effect on drugs is almost non-existent. If there were a concern to eliminate, drugs are a problem, a serious one, and if there were a concern to eliminate them or to reduce the problem, it's known how to do it. There have been even government-sponsored studies on it. The most efficient way, cost-effective way to reduce the harmful effects of drugs is education and prevention. The least effective way of doing it, cost-effective, is the various forms of the war on drugs. That's been known for years. And what's more, there's success when it's tried. So the most lethal drug is tobacco. Deaths from tobacco overwhelm deaths from all other drugs, and often people are killed from tobacco by just being there, passive smoking. Drugs harm the person who takes them, not the person sitting next to them. The second most lethal drug is alcohol. If you look at killings and so on, it leads to violence. And there has been some significant amelioration of these. So tobacco smoking has declined, not because it was made, because you were thrown in jail for it, but because of a rise in education and understanding. You rarely see an American college student smoke anymore, and not because they're afraid of being put in prison, but because they know it's harmful. So it's the same with the decline in eating of red meat, let's say. It's declined. Again, it wasn't illegal, but there was a change in the level of comprehension and understanding. And that would be the way to deal with those drugs that are called drugs, as distinct from the ones that aren't. But the primary mode of treatment can be effective. But the main thing is prevention. And that's a matter of creating a cultural and social system in which people don't want to kill themselves.
Since 2008, drug use disorders in the United States have risen dramatically due to opioid addiction, and by 2017 included about 4% of the population. The American death rate from drug abuse is now more than 23 times higher than Portugal, which introduced decriminalization and harm reduction programs in 2001. We can do even better than Portugal by also removing the criminal element. This means not decriminalization, but legalization and regulation of drugs for quality control to improve the public health, address poverty and inequality, improve race relations, restore civil rights, reduce the crime rate, change the prevailing prison philosophy from one of retribution to rehabilitation, and lower the financial cost to society, which after 50 years of this lunacy is upwards of $2 trillion in today's money. Along with legalization, we should introduce regulation and taxation that will allow drug sales to pay for related treatment. We could have a licensing system that could be embedded in the data code in your driver's license or ID after you take a drug and alcohol education course. Your license would only list the psychoactive substances you choose. This sort of licensing could also apply to those wishing to buy firearms or other potentially dangerous products. All purchases could then be recorded and controlled at the point of sale. People not trusting themselves or those committed to sobriety can simply choose to not get the applicable designation on their license. The required course could also include other useful public health information, such as the dangers of overprescribing antibiotics or fallacies regarding vaccinations, for example. Drug use licenses would simultaneously address age or mental health restrictions, as well as educating people about taking responsibility for informed choices. At the same time, advertising for potentially dangerous substances, including alcohol and tobacco, should be banned. The American opioid crisis was caused by the pharmaceutical industry and the doctors they rewarded for writing prescriptions. Medical marijuana, cannabis, non-addictive in all its forms, is a safe, low-cost alternative to opiates. We don't need more academic studies or wasted lives to tell us that prohibition has created a national emergency and that we must finally end the war on drugs.